Chardonnay is the most boring cultivar in the entire world, said no one except an old, miserable crone with no sense of imagination. Now, if you've spent any time with us at all, you will know how long we have spent trying to express just how versatile and dynamic the cultivar of Chardonnay can be. One of its most fascinating traits is how much it can change the way it expresses itself from climate, to the point where it even feels like the wine is actually changing color in our mind's eye. But one question we've never spent time answering is why? Why does Chardonnay have this ability to magically and radically transform the way it expresses itself? Sauvignon Blanc, for example, can be grown in a whole number of different climates, and while it definitely does change, it is still largely recognizable as Sauvignon Blanc, regardless of where it's grown. Now, if the question, what is the scientific basis for the way in which Chardonnay changes from climate to climate, sounds like a really boring chemistry lecture that you'd rather forget, then bear with me for just 1 minute, because if you can hang on to just one mental image, then you'll be able to understand all the reasons behind why Chardonnay is so delightfully adaptable and deliciously diverse. So close your eyes and picture this. The biblical character of Queen Esther is sitting next to a campfire with her twin sister. Now, it turns out that her twin sister is actually a clone, and this clone is roasting a frozen green apple over the fire. Esther, for her part, is holding in her hands a carrot and a bar of Nordic rye soap. Got it? Esther, clone, fire, frozen apple, carrot, Nordic rye soap. Now, let's unpack that mental image. The first part of the image is Queen Esther, and Queen Esther should have reminded you of the term esters, which, along with thiols, produce all sorts of delicious aromas in all sorts of wines. In warmer climates, esters usually develop more intensely because in warm climates, there are usually higher levels of sugar accumulating in the berries, which require higher temperatures when performing fermentation. And warmer ferments lead to the development of delightfully rich, sweet, tropical aromas like pineapple and possibly sweet peach and nectarine. Now, moving on from Esther, we look around the campfire and we see her twin, who is actually a clone. The clone is meant to remind us of Chardonnay's absolutely epic genetic adaptability. This particular cultivar very quickly switches up its genetic code as a result of influence from the climate in which it grows. And what this means is that if you were to isolate a whole lot of clones from, say, Burgundy, which is generally a rather cool Chardonnay climate, they would be vastly different to the Chardonnay clones that perhaps were isolated in California, for example. Now, moving back from the clone back to Esther, what does she have in her hand? Well, first of all, she has a carrot, and she snaps the carrot in half and passes one piece to her clone in a gesture of sharing. Now, that broken carrot is meant to remind us of carotenoids. Now, carotenoids are crucial in the development of aromas, but really, in Chardonnay specifically, the most important role they play is to be broken down by enzymes to trigger more important building blocks in aromas. So, what we need to know now is that in warmer climates, these carotenoids are broken down by enzymes far more quickly and far more comprehensively. Which brings us to our bar of Nordic rye soap, because carotenoids, when broken down, form into norisoprenoids. And norisoprenoids are really where the aromatic magic happens. And so they trigger all of these incredible flavors and aromas, really, that are some of Chardonnay's most distinctive notes, like honey and slightly older Chardonnays, but also green apple and baked apple and floral elements. Norisoprenoids are super important in red wines as well, incidentally, but in Chardonnay in particular, because Chardonnay has a huge number of norisoprenoids and even more of them when in warmer climates. Finally, if we shift our attention from Esther and her carrot and Nordic rye soap back to her clone, we remember that she was roasting a frozen green apple over a fire. Now, the word apple in Latin is malum, and malum reminds us of malic acid. In cooler climates, hence the frozen apple, malic acid is preserved a lot more effectively by the grapes on the vines. Malic acid is also a super sour organic acid that tastes not unlike Granny Smith apples. And so cool climate Chardonnays will often have a lot of malic acid, which makes them taste like sour green apples. But in warmer climates, malic acid is broken down very quickly. So not only will a warm climate Chardonnay, represented by the fire, have far more neurisoprenoids, but they will also have far less malic acid and perhaps more of the other more gentle organic acids. And just to make sure that you don't forget this delightful mental image, we'll recap quickly. Ester and her clone. Ester representing esters, which are formed a lot more effectively in warm climate. Her clone represents Chardonnay's genetic adaptability from climate to climate. Ester has a carrot which she breaks, a carotenoid which breaks down into neurisoprenoids, and neurisoprenoids trigger amazing rich aromas that everyone loves in Chardonnay. We mustn't forget that also in warmer climates, enzymes act more effectively, which produces more neurisoprenoids and have carotenoids breaking down, so less carotenoids. Finally, the frozen green apple. In cool climates, lots of malic acid, tart, leaner type style Chardonnay, whereas in warmer climates, the fire breaks down malic acid and leads to gentle, richer fruit elements, not only because of lack of malic acid, but also because when there are warmer ferments as a result of higher sugar, you get more tropical aromas like mango and pineapple. And you might say, Han, how is any of this relevant? Well, it's relevant because today's hand drink solo wine of the day is a Chardonnay from the estate of Rickety Bridge in the very sun-drenched valley of Franschhoek. Incidentally, if you want to stay up to speed with this sort of chemistry, climate, wine history, wine science, or just some of South Africa's most dynamic winemakers, then subscribe to the Hand Drink Solo YouTube channel where we have 400 videos like this one. And give us a like because it helps more people to discover our content. The fruit used to make today's wine comes from 29-year-old Chardonnay vines planted on Rickety Bridge Estate, which makes them amongst some of the oldest Chardonnay vines in Franschhoek. The estate itself is a little older. It was granted to Paulina de Villiers in 1797, which would have made her one of South Africa's very first female landowners. The name of the estate, Rickety Bridge, refers to a literal old rickety bridge that was necessary to access the estate from the center of the valley, crossing over the Franschhoek River. Now, that original bridge was blown away by the winds of change, but mercifully replaced by something a little more sturdy, and the estate kept the name as a nod to its history. Speaking of winds of change, Rickety Bridge as an estate has also undergone some exciting transformations. It came under new ownership in 2023 and has since then undergone some significant investment. So not only has the winery been completely overhauled, but there's also been a whole bunch of new vineyards planted with a sharper focus on Franschhoek Chardonnay, but then also plans to plant a little more Syrah. But I guess that's enough talk about the past and the future. Let's get into the glass and see what awaits us. Well, when we give this guy a sniff, the nose is really delightfully generous, and you do get a lot of warm citrus, you get sweet peach, there's a touch of floral, and then also some nutmeg, which makes sense because this wine has indeed been barrel fermented. But what we don't necessarily pick up is any of those creamy kind of lemon curd or peach yogurt type notes, and that's because there is absolutely no malic conversion on this particular wine. Now, when we give it a sip, well, the wine really does have deliciously concentrated, quite broad fruit that really flows over the palate. And we talked about citrus and stone fruit, and really that shows up in spades on the palate. There might even be a hint of tropical mango in there as well. But you can see that my mouth is watering because that citrus acidity down the middle really is beautifully prominent. So winemaker Donovan Ackerman's decision not to allow malolactic conversion to take place really does pay off, because you get beautifully bright, laser-like acidity in a warm climate Chardonnay. Another thing you notice really is that generous element of ripe fruit, which feels like this beautiful blend of, as I say, ripe sunshine, nectarine, and peaches and oranges. And you might think, well, is there more sugar in the wine because this fruit is so generous? But actually, there's only 2 grams of sugar in an entire liter of this wine. To give you context, 2 grams of sugar per liter is roughly 100 times less sugar than you'd get if you drank a liter of grape juice. The other thing we can pick up with that fruity concentration is those higher level of neurisoprenoids as a result of the slightly warmer Franschhoek climate. So to sum it all up, I think this wine beautifully communicates the need for smart winemaking and timeous harvesting in warmer climates when producing wines, especially made from a cultivar like Chardonnay. So Donovan Ackerman has done an absolutely wonderful job of preserving natural acidity so that he can deliver a wine that is concentrated, full of flavor, and still really quite bright and fresh. Okay, so that is all we have time for today, but I will leave a link to 2 videos, one of which talks about Chardonnay clones and their impact on Chardonnay flavor. And the other link will take you to a video about a Chardonnay from a very different part of Franschhoek with a very different flavor expression. But watching this video and that one will definitely give you a fuller, more complete idea of what Franschhoek has to offer, specifically with regards to their Chardonnays.